Hey everybody, I want to talk about something that's been on my mind since the last video I did, where I talked about how narcissists will block your phone access. I had a viewer comment about parental alienation syndrome, and I gave a number of links and responses on that. And I really just felt like I should go ahead and just dedicate a whole video to it because it's been on my mind. Because I have personal history with this. Whenever I was going through through my divorce, and I was first trying to put all the pieces of my life together, I came across what's known as parental alienation syndrome, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's basically par for the course when it comes to a hostile divorce, and that is, you have one good parent who demonizes the other parent to the children. They recruit, it becomes like a game of favorites. They turn the children against one parent. They try to punish the other parent through the children. And really it just comes to recruiting the children to the conflict and a sustained, the words that he uses, a sustained campaign of denigration against the other parent. In other words, like this goes on for a long time, just constantly bad-mouthing the other parent and getting the child to dislike the other parent just based solely on their perspective, right? And a lot of it rings true, and a lot of it, is very familiar. And a lot of it, I could say that I experienced at one point in time or another. Yet, for those of you who have come here based on the search term for parental alienation syndrome, if you've had experience with it, especially in a courtroom and just in general, what you'll find, unfortunately, is that most of the time you get nowhere when you try to use it in court, or when you try to use it for enforcement, or actually use it in a practical, productive manner. In other words, you found something that describes your life, yet even though you have found this information, virtually nothing good comes of it. It's just like, yeah, okay, that's you. And that's it. And there is a reason for this. But before I get into the reason, there's also something out there that's a trap for men. So if you're a dude and you've seen this, ignore it. It's called divorce-related malicious motherhood syndrome, or divorce-induced malicious motherhood syndrome, or sometimes just malicious motherhood syndrome. And that is very similar to parental alienation syndrome, just maybe without the alienation. And that's basically when children are involved and there's a divorce, the mother acts out and is very malicious against her ex-husband for whatever reasons, etc., etc. Hold on. I just got this cat, so he's looking for a buddy. So if you wonder why I'm petting this cat here, so ow, 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 ow. I'm no longer petting the cat. Okay, but divorce-related malicious motherhood syndrome, basically it's similar to the campaign of denigration against the other parent, but more so along the lines of just being a malicious actor, and not necessarily bringing the children into it, but still being malicious. And it says 90+% of women in divorces exhibit these characteristic behaviors within the first year, and then something like 40% after a few more years, and then after like 5 years, it's an even lower percentage, etc. But again, you won't get very far with this knowledge. You can't arm yourself with this knowledge and then fight the war. It's a bit of a pitfall. It's a bit of a trap. And the reason is, ultimately, the reason behind it, what you don't know and what you'll find out, is the fact that both of these, and there any of the other similar things, are not backed by clinical psychology anywhere. It's nowhere. In all the works of clinical psychology and all the disorders, DSM and the whatever acronyms in clinical psychology, take your pick, they're not a real thing. they're not a real thing because in all of it, it's a description, but there's not a diagnosis criteria. So there's no metrics. There's no specific metrics for this. So for example, parental alienation syndrome, the sustained campaign of denigration. Sustained, okay, well, so how long does it have to go on for it to be sustained? And what is a campaign? How is a campaign of denigration different from disparaging comments and disparaging remarks, right? So a campaign, how do you even define a campaign of behavior and denigration as opposed to all the other kinds of behaviors, right? So in order for it to be diagnosable, like up to the standards to which family courts require and the standards required by the legal system, there's nothing, right? So if you go to court using parental alienation syndrome and divorce-related malicious motherhood syndrome, or any of that other stuff, which, by the way, there's also a satirical response to that where it's divorce-related douchebaggy father syndrome or something like that, where it's just like the response to how guys get butthurt and pitch a fit during divorce and all that. It's kind of humorous. It's a tongue-in-cheek response to what is considered a sexist piece of literature. You will not get far in a courtroom unless you have a judge that just hasn't ever heard of anything. Like if you're in a courtroom where the judge is just sort of disconnected from actual professional witnesses and mental health professionals, and who has been disconnected from so long where he just sees a paper that looks official, then you might get somewhere. But if you go to a judge who is competent, who has years on the bench, chances are you're not going to get far. You won't. So I want to so now that you know why you won't get far, let me sort of explain why it sounds so true when you read it and you think, man, this has to be a real thing. Okay? It's because it describes the symptoms of actual clinical psychology shits. We call it shits, right? This is disorders and everything else that's just not disorder, but just general fucktarditude, okay? Fucktardery. There are actual clinical psychology things that describe what you're going through. It's not parental alienation syndrome. It's not. So learn that. Save yourself thousands of dollars. What is it? Well, fortunately for you, I have found a good source of information. His name is Dr. Craig Childress, Dr. C.A. Childress. He has a number of videos out on YouTube that are published by other people. He has a very small private channel with just a few hundred or thousand viewers. 100 or 1,000, not 100,000, okay? It's a very small channel where he's just put out a few, just little small, short, personal videos. He's got a playlist where he shreds parental alienation syndrome. He's got another playlist where he pulls out all the clinical psychology books, shows you the cover, like holds it up. Obviously, this is my hand, but imagine this is a book. He holds the book up, shows you the title, shows you the author, and then he will actually flip to the important pages in the book, and he will show you the diagrams that matter. He will show you the words that matter. He'll flip through, and he'll show you several pages out of each book and explain to you what it is, why it's important, and how you can use it. It's a very, very good playlist. And then lastly, the third link I'm going to add, hopefully, try to, is there is a video of him testifying in Pennsylvania about what causes the recruited child, the supported child, what is perceived as parental alienation syndrome, what it actually is. So let me get into this, okay? Narcissistic personality disorders and borderline. So if you're a narcissist or borderline parent, both disorders are very closely related. They both originate from the same attachment style in infanthood, which is disorganized attachment. Growing up, as you grow and develop, you develop what's called a schema, which is basically like a mold, right? So you start to develop schemas or molds of what expectations you can have of people given their role in your life, okay? So you grow up thinking, having expectations of, okay, I can have these sort of expectations of teachers. I can have these kinds of expectations of father figures. I can have these kinds of expectations of mothers. There's one reason why whenever you get married and you start hearing people complaining about marriage, it's like, I swear to God, I have to be his mother, or I have to be her father, daddy issues, mommy's boy, daddy's girl, that kind of stuff, right? That's all kind of sort of born of that. Well, whenever you grow up in a disorganized home, you develop these schemas, and it's a very, very specific schema that causes this. And that is, there's a trinity where they grow up as a child where they have one abusive parent and they have one supportive parent. And that's what they grow up learning. When they're a child, they have one parent who's abusive, one parent that's supportive. And then chances are, whenever they got with you, they were saying, my mother was a nightmare. I had a nightmare father. I had a nightmare mother. Thank God I'm with you, right? Well, then something happens in the divorce. Something happens in divorce where that schema from childhood and the schema that they had married to you when they divorced, they had been, hope and change. Thanks, Obama. They had hoped for change, that their life would be different. Well, in the divorce, once the divorce goes through, they sort of go through this reckoning where it's like, okay, you know what? Like, I thought it was going to be different, but you know what? It's just my life has turned out to be exactly the way it was. Boom. That network comes back where you have supportive parent, abused child, and abusive parent. Okay? And if they're the supportive parent, then that makes you the abusive parent, and that makes the child abused. And we all know with children, it doesn't matter what child it is, you can convince a child that they're being abused out of anything, right? And he even testifies that he gets children all the time and says, my dad abuses me. Well, okay, what does he do that's abusive? Well, he takes away my iPad. Well, why do you take it? That's not abuse, that's discipline. Why do you take away your iPad? Because I wasn't following directions. That's not abuse, that is discipline, that is parenting, and that's the fundamental difference. But you can convince any child that anything unpleasant or negative that happens in their life is abuse. And so, in the mind of the parent, they think they're the supportive parent, and by default, that makes you the abusive parent. You have to be the abusive parent, because the more they question their child and they hear about these things that are making their child unhappy, in their mind, it's corroborating abuse. And that comes from the splitting pathology of narcissism and borderline. Splitting is, friend or foe, right or wrong, hot or cold, you're for me or against me, right? So the splitting pathology is only found in NPD and BPD. That's it, right? Those are the only two disorders in which splitting occurs. So when you have this phenomenon of parental alienation going on, where you have one parent actively recruiting the child against the other parent, assuming you're not actually an abusive piece of shit, if you're just a normal guy or normal girl, normal mother, right? You're a normal parent, but the other parent, for whatever reason, has a chip on their shoulder, especially if they went through abuse as a child. That's what you're dealing with. You're dealing with splitting, you're dealing with cluster B personality, and you're dealing with somebody who's either borderline or narcissistic, because they both originate from disorganized attachment. They both have that trifecta of schemas of the abused child, abusive parent, and the supportive parent. I'm about out of time. Check them out, Dr. C.A. Childress. C.A. is in California, first name Craig. Look for the Pennsylvania testimony, is awesome. And look for his personal channel. And I'm going to drop you some links in the description as well. Down there, check it out. Please do. Really good info. Thanks again. Like, comment, or share, and I'll see you on the net. Whatever.